Close your eyes and let the whispers of time take you back to a world where marble shone beneath a golden sun, where legions marched with purpose, and where destiny carved its name into the face of history. This is the story of Rome. Not just an empire of stone and sword, but a dream born from the dust, tested by fire, and remembered by eternity. Before the empire, before the marble, the legions, the emperors, there was only earth and the whisper of destiny carried by the wind. They say every great story begins with a spark, a moment so small that time itself barely notices it. Rome began as nothing more than a collection of huts scattered across 7 hills, kissed by the Tiber River and watched over by the rising Italian sun. There were no emperors here, no gilded armor, no roaring crowds, only shepherds, wanderers, and dreamers, men and women who looked to the horizon and saw something greater than the world they knew. And then came the legend, a tale so old that history itself bows to it. 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus, born of divine will and mortal struggle, left to die in the wild, yet cradled by fate itself. The she-wolf, that silent guardian, nursed them not just with milk, but with purpose. They found something sacred, a will to survive, a promise to rise. From the blood of one brother, Rome was born. From his dream, the eternal city began to breathe. Imagine it, a dawn breaking over a young world, mist rolling down the Tiber's banks, the sound of hammers striking stone, voices calling out across the hills. A people with no riches, no map, and yet an unshakable conviction that they were chosen, not by gods alone, but by time itself, to build something eternal. The early Romans were not kings, not conquerors. They were builders of spirit. Their lives were hard, their hands calloused, but within them burned a fire that would one day light the world. They carved roads through rock, raised walls from dust, and built temples to the unseen, not to seek luxury, but for them, greatness wasn't born from ease. It was carved from struggle. The Republic was still a dream unborn, yet its heartbeat could already be heard in those early centuries. The rhythm of discipline, of order, of shared purpose. Each stone they laid whispered a promise. We endure. In that promise was something beautiful, a belief that humanity could rise above chaos, that laws could outlive men, and that legacy could be built not in the fleeting fires of conquest, but in the slow, patient rhythm of creation. The soil beneath Rome carried stories of countless lives, of farmers and fighters, priests and poets, all bound by the same unseen thread. They didn't yet know what they were creating. They didn't yet understand that the very air they breathed would one day carry the echoes of 1,000 generations. But destiny knew, and so the city grew. Hill by hill, wall by wall, heart by heart. It wasn't power that made Rome rise, it was faith. Not the faith of temples and gods, but the faith that mankind could craft order from chaos, beauty from dust, eternity from time. As the sun set each day over the Tiber, the people of Rome looked upon what they had built, not with pride, but with purpose, for they knew the journey had only begun. Their empire was not yet born, but the spirit that would one day move armies and shape civilizations was already alive, quiet, patient, eternal. From humble hills to the heartbeat of civilization, Rome did not rise in peace, it rose in struggle. There came a time when the quiet breath of the early city turned into the march of ambition. The same people who once built walls to protect themselves began to build roads, not to hide, but to reach. Rome's destiny could no longer be contained by the 7 hills. It began to hunger for order, for purpose, for immortality. The Republic was born, not from comfort, but from conflict. The Romans crafted something the world had never seen before, a system where men debated, where ideas clashed sharper than swords, where the voice of the citizen echoed louder than any king's command. They believed no man should be above the law, and in that belief they laid the foundation of their might. But freedom always comes with a price. In the Senate's marble halls, beneath the bronze gaze of their gods, Rome learned that unity was fragile. That ambition, if left unchecked, could burn brighter than loyalty. Civil wars stained the soil that had once given birth to legend. Brothers turned against brothers, generals against their republic. Yet somehow through that chaos, Rome did not fall. It hardened, because Rome's genius was not in avoiding struggle. It was in mastering it. Each time the city broke, it rebuilt itself stronger. Each time its people bled, they remembered why they must endure. Their legions became not just armies, but symbols. Discipline made flesh, duty forged in iron. Each Roman soldier carried more than a sword. He carried the weight of civilization itself. Picture them, ranks upon ranks of men beneath the blazing sun, armor gleaming, hearts steady. They marched not just for conquest, but for order. Every step they took, every flag they raised expanded the boundaries of a dream that had begun with two brothers and a wolf. Rome reached across mountains, seas, and deserts, and wherever its banner stood, so too did its laws, its roads, its language. They tamed rivers, carved cities from wilderness, and built aqueducts that carried water like veins through the body of an empire. They turned chaos into structure, a masterpiece drawn across the face of the known world. But perhaps Rome's greatest triumph wasn't what it conquered. It was what it created. The Roman ideal, civitas, the idea that a man's worth lay not in his birth, but in his duty to the state. A belief that order could outlast power, that law could stand taller than kings. In those ideals, Rome became more than a place. It became a principle, a light carried by those who believed in reason, justice, and purpose. Still, beneath the glory, there was always fire. Ambition smoldered in every Senate seat, every palace hall, every soldier's heart. The Republic had forged order, but it had also forged pride. And pride, like the flame that lights the torch, can burn just as easily as it illuminates. And so as centuries passed, the weight of Rome's greatness began to press upon itself. The Republic that was once united by virtue began to tremble beneath the hands of men who sought to rule it. But not yet, not yet. For this was Rome at its height, the empire unborn but inevitable, the world's greatest civilization preparing to step from the light of democracy into the shadow of empire. It was a time when marble met blood, when ideals became weapons, and when destiny whispered one final promise. And to rule the world, you must first master yourself. And Rome had learned both. And then, Rome stood still, not in silence, but in splendor. There came a moment in history when the world seemed to kneel before one name, Rome. From the misted shores of Britannia to the golden sands of Egypt, from the Rhine's frozen banks to the burning edge of Arabia, all roads led to her. The dream that had begun as a flicker on the Tiber had become the blazing heart of the known world. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was not merely the absence of war, it was the hum of life in perfect rhythm. Merchants filled the streets with silk and spices, poets wove words into eternity, and marble glistened in the sunlight like frozen lightning. It was an age where the hands that once built walls now sculpted gods from stone. Rome had conquered not just lands but time itself. Walk through her streets in your mind, the forum alive with debate, where senators' voices carried through the marble arches. Colosseum roaring with the breath of 100,000 souls, where courage and death shared the same stage. The Pantheon rising like a prayer carved from the earth, its dome a mirror to the heavens. Every column, every statue, every shadow whispered the same truth. That Rome had achieved what humanity had always dreamed of, order, beauty, and power woven into one immovable state. But this glory was not born from gold, it was carved from discipline. Behind every emperor's triumph stood the strength of the legions. Behind every poet's word stood centuries of sacrifice. Behind every law stood the will of generations who refused to let their dream fade. The Latin tongue became the world's language, a bridge of sound that carried laws, prayers, and poetry across continents. It wasn't merely a language of empire, it was the rhythm of civilization itself. Every word spoken in Latin carried centuries of weight, the voice of builders, thinkers, conquerors, and dreamers. And still, amid all its splendor, Rome remained human. For beneath the marble lived men and women who loved, who wept, who prayed. The baker in his shop, the soldier on the frontier, the mother watching her child beneath a Roman sky, each of them part of something greater than themselves. Rome's greatness was not only in its rulers, but in its people. Those who believed that to be Roman was to belong to something eternal. Yet even at its height, in the glow of its golden age, the whisper of time lingered. Empires, like men, do not stand forever. Marble cracks, statues crumble, voices fade, but Rome defied that truth for centuries. It taught the world how to build, how to govern, how to dream beyond the limits of flesh. It stood as a monument to what mankind could achieve when purpose and power walked hand in hand. As the sun set on the empire's greatest days, the light did not die. It stretched, casting its glow across centuries to come. For even as the edges of the empire began to blur, its heart still beat. not in the stones, but in the spirit that had built them. And that spirit, that flame of Rome, would continue to burn long after the emperors turned to dust. For this was the age when the world spoke one language, when humanity stood at the height of its creation and whispered in awe, "Oh, behold." Every empire begins with a dream and ends with a whisper. Rome, the eternal, the unconquerable, the shining heart of civilization, began to tremble beneath its own weight, not from the swords of its enemies, but from the cracks that formed within. The marble that once gleamed began to fade. The streets that once echoed with triumph now carried the quiet shuffle of doubt. The Senate, once a chamber of vision, became a theater of pride. And the emperors who had once led legions across the world, now ruled behind walls of luxury and fear. For centuries, Rome had conquered others. Now, it began to be conquered by itself. Greed replaced duty. Gold outweighed honor. The same discipline that had built the empire began to rot beneath comfort and arrogance. The legions, once unbreakable, stood divided. The people once united by purpose began to forget what it meant to be Roman. The empire grew too vast, too heavy, too human. It stretched from desert to forest, from mountain to sea, and in that vastness, it began to lose its soul. Invaders came, waves of men from beyond the frontiers, drawn not only by Rome's wealth, but by the scent of weakness. The walls still stood, but the will behind them began to crumble. The great eagle that had soared above nations now fought just to survive the storm. And yet, the fall was not sudden. It was slow, like dusk descending over the world. Flicker by flicker, the lights went out. The libraries that had preserved the wisdom of ages turned to ash. The cities that had once pulsed with life fell into silence. And where once stood marble now stood ruins, kissed by ivy and rain. But listen closely. Even in that silence, you can still hear something. Not despair, not defeat, but acceptance. Because Rome, in its wisdom, understood something the world often forgets. That no empire, no matter how mighty, is eternal in form, only in spirit. The stones may fall, but the story endures. The fall of Rome was not merely the end of an empire. It was the rebirth of an idea. That even in ruin, beauty remains. That even in collapse, lessons survive. For through its fall, Rome gave birth to the world that would follow. Its laws lived on in nations. Its language echoed in churches and courts. Its architecture became the skeleton of every city that dared to rise again. Even the ashes of its glory became soil for a new age to grow. In time, men would walk through the ruins and feel a quiet awe, not for what was lost, but for what still lingered. They would touch the stones and feel the pulse of history. They would whisper the old words, Roma Eterna, eternal Rome. And maybe, just maybe, that was Rome's greatest victory. Not that it lasted forever, but that it never truly died. Every empire falls, the wind seems to say, but only few become immortal. And as the last embers of the Western world faded into shadow, Rome's light was carried onward, not by kings, not by soldiers, but by memory. Because true greatness is not in how long you stand, it's in how long you remembered after you fall. The empire fell, but its spirit never did. Long after the banners were torn down, long after the emperors faded into dust, Rome continued to breathe. Not in the stones that crumble, but in the hearts that remember. For Rome was never just a city. It was an idea, an unbroken thread woven through the centuries. You can find it in the arches that rise above modern streets, in the words that linger in our languages, and the laws that still echo with Roman reason. You can feel it in the quiet dignity of every courthouse, in the symmetry of every city, in the whisper of every nation that seeks to endure. Rome lives in us, in the order we build, in the roads we pave, and the dreams we dare to chase beyond our time. Because that was always the heart of Rome. Not conquest, not empire, but legacy. Look across the ruins today. The Colosseum standing like a heartbeat frozen in stone, the broken pillars of the Forum still reaching for the sky. They are not symbols of death, they are reminders of survival. The wind that moves through those ruins does not speak of endings, it speaks of endurance. Even faith itself carried Rome forward. From the ashes of its gods rose new beliefs, new hopes, new visions of eternity. Rome's temples may have fallen, but its devotion to something greater than man never faded. It transformed, evolved, just as time demanded it to. And so the eternal city lived on. Through kingdoms and nations, through darkness and rebirth. The Renaissance would one day lift its eyes back to her and whisper, "Teach us again." And she did. Through art, through thought, through the memory of her greatness, Rome rose once more, not as an empire, but as a teacher of the world. For every age that followed in its own way has tried to rebuild what Rome once stood for: structure, reason, order, beauty. Every government that upholds law, every engineer who measures perfection, every artist who dreams of harmony, every soul that seeks meaning in chaos. They all carry a spark, the spark of the eternal city, and that is the true empire, not of marble or sword, but of memory and spirit. Rome's greatest conquest was not over lands, but over time itself. It built something no army could destroy, the belief that human hands guided by vision can touch eternity. Rome never truly fell, whispers history. It simply changed its shape. It became every city that dreamed of greatness, every civilization that refused to surrender to the dark, every soul that looked upon ruin and chose to build again. And so, even now, when the night is quiet and the stars look down upon the ruins of that ancient world, the echo still lingers. The sound of sandals on stone, the murmur of Latin prayers, the heartbeat of something immortal. Because Rome was never about power. It was about the will to endure, to rise, to fall, and to rise again. And in that eternal rhythm, humanity found its reflection. For though empires fade and ages pass, some dreams are too vast for time to silence. And this was one of them. Rome lives on, not in history, but in us.